The wind was calm across the barren field where the Earth outpost stood silent and forgotten, far from the crowded cities and distant from the noise of wars and politics. A lonely place meant for science and study, surrounded by nothing but red sand and quiet skies, where only a few humans worked on deep research and equipment maintenance, with no expectation of conflict or attention, and no reason to believe that danger would ever come to this place. Inside the command room, a quiet man named Ely moved between wires and panels, fixing circuits and reading data while others laughed and talked in the break room. He preferred his silence and his tools, keeping to himself, never saying more than needed, and never drawing attention to who he really was. Just a mechanic, a technician, someone useful but invisible, the kind of man no one ever looked at twice. Then the sky changed. Without warning, shadows fell across the outpost as massive ships broke through the clouds, engines humming low, and cruel shapes, sharp and dark, blocking the sun and filling the sky with dread. Within seconds, alarms screamed across the station, lights flashed and screens glitched as every system tried to respond. But it was too late. The Krell had arrived, led by a warlord feared across multiple systems, known not for peace but for domination and destruction, a name that spread fear across planets and left no survivors in its wake. Commander Threx landed without resistance, stepping onto Earth soil for the first time with the pride of a conqueror, his armor black and red, his eyes cold like steel, and his voice carried by the translator with sharp confidence as he looked at the human workers now rounded up and kneeling before him, his guards towering behind. He laughed a low, cruel sound as he looked at the frightened faces in front of him, calling them weak, calling them soft and stupid, claiming this outpost now belonged to the Krell Empire, and anyone who resisted would be turned to ash. With a flick of his finger, he gave the order, and 2 humans were executed instantly, not for resistance, but to make a point. That point was clear: obey. Ely watched all this from a narrow vent above the ceiling, hidden in the shadows where he had climbed. To the moment the ships appeared, no one saw him slip away. No one even remembered he was there, and that was just how he wanted it. His heart pounded, but his face remained calm, his eyes sharp as he memorized faces, positions, weapons, and exits. His old instincts waking up like fire in his blood, memories returning not of wires and machines but of training pain, missions, loss of who he once was before he gave it all up to be forgotten and normal. He saw Threx standing tall, shouting orders, treating the humans like nothing more than insects below his boots, and in that moment, Ely felt no fear, only a cold, burning clarity. Something inside him whispered that this warlord, this overconfident alien, made one mistake, a fatal one. He came to the wrong place, and he chose the wrong human to underestimate. Mara was dragged in next, kicking and screaming, her face bruised but her eyes full of fire. She had been one of the few who tried to fight back, even if it was hopeless. She had grabbed a wrench and swung it at a guard before they took her down hard. Now she was shoved next to the others and forced to kneel. Threx walked to her slowly, mocking her effort, asking why a fragile creature like her thought resistance was anything but a joke. She spit at his feet without a word. He smiled, but there was no humor, only arrogance and cold calculation, and he declared she would be used as bait for the ghost they had yet to catch, the one still hiding somewhere in the outpost, the one causing flickers in the cameras and gaps in their control, a whisper of resistance, a silent shadow. Threx did not know his name, did not know his face, did not know that he was being watched, studied, and tracked every second. Ely moved through the old service tunnels, collecting tools and supplies, watching the alien guards marking every patrol route and security blind spot. He had not touched a gun in years, but his hands remembered, his body moved with purpose and silence, and he was becoming someone else again, someone dangerous, someone deadly. Night fell across the outpost, but inside the air was tense with fear. The humans locked in holding rooms, and Krell soldiers patrolling with heavy steps, never knowing that just above them, or just behind them, something moved, something human. Ely listened to every word Threx spoke, He studied every command, he learned the way. Threk stood the way he turned his head, the way he underestimated every human breath and heartbeat that was going to be his undoing as the night deepened and the stars blinked cold and far above the desert sky. Eli crouched behind a broken panel, a sharpened tool in one hand and a stolen map in the other, and for the first time in years, he let himself speak out loud. Though no one was there to hear him, you chose the wrong human, and the game had just begun. Morning light never touched the inside of the captured outpost. Everything remained cold and under control of the Krell soldiers who walked in steady patterns. With heavy armor and silent menace watching the cameras monitoring every hall, their leader had ordered complete lockdown until the mysterious troublemaker was found. But Eli was never one to be caught by eyes that only looked where they expected something to be. He had spent years learning to hide not just in shadows, but in patterns and systems and blind angles. Where no one thought to check, he moved through vents and service shafts, silently taking note of everything, learning their routines, their weapons, their communication habits, and most importantly, their weaknesses. He began testing the limits, dropping pieces of metal at the far ends of corridors, causing short power surges in small systems, jamming doors for seconds, enough to annoy, not enough to alarm. In those moments, he watched how the guards reacted, how fast they moved, what they said into their radios, and where they always looked first. They never looked up. That was their mistake. Using the old maintenance panels, he slipped into the storage bay where crates of mining gear and tools were kept untouched by the invaders who were too focused on weapons and control. Eli moved with purpose, collecting parts. He needed scraps of wire, broken fuses, sharp blades, and pieces of old machinery that most saw as junk, but he saw as pieces of something dangerous, something he could use to fight back. He returned to his hidden corner in a forgotten section of the engineering wing and began building his first set of traps, devices made from scraps that could disable Krell armor, that could send shockwaves through metal floors or trigger explosive bursts from fuel pipes, all silent, all precise. But Eli knew this was not enough. Not yet. He needed eyes. He needed more information. And he needed to know where Mara was being held. She had always been the one to speak when he stayed quiet. She brought him tea. When he worked late nights and told stories he never responded to, but always listened to her laughter, had been one of the few things that made the outpost feel like more than a cage. She did not know his past, but she respected his space, and in her silence there was kindness. Now she was in danger, and Eli could not allow that. He climbed through the ductwork above the main hall and reached the control room where two Krell officers argued over the sudden system glitches. One of them slammed his fist into the console, while the other adjusted a screen showing the prisoner cells. In that moment, Eli saw her bruised and quiet behind a force field, sitting against the wall with her eyes closed but alive. He memorized the layout, the pattern of the guards, the code typed into the control screen, and then retreated back into the dark where no one could hear him breathing. Night. The first Krell soldier disappeared, not killed, not harmed, just missing one moment walking the storage hallway. The next gone, only a broken floor panel left behind, and a soft electric hum in the air. The other soldiers raised alarms, but found no trace, no blood, no body, no sound. Threk stood in the command center, furious, demanding answers, his voice echoing across the metal walls, accusing his own soldiers of failure. He had ruled over 12 worlds, burned colonies to ash, and now he was being toyed with by a ghost in an outpost, meant to be conquered in an hour. He did not know the name of the ghost. He only knew someone dared to defy him. Someone dared to humiliate him, and that was not acceptable. More soldiers patrolled, more cameras were checked, more scanners activated, but nothing was found. Eli moved like smoke through their security, like silence through their noise. He found Mara again, later through another vent, watching her as she shifted uncomfortably on the floor, her face pale and tired, but her spirit still burning. He wanted to call out to her, to let her know she was not alone, but he could not risk it. Not yet. He could only leave a message where she would see it, a small symbol scratched into the wall beside her. A mark only someone from Earth's Special Division would know when. She saw it the next morning, her eyes widened, and she smiled faintly, hope returning to her chest. Even if she did not know who had left it, she knew. Someone was coming. Eli increased his sabotage, taking out power in sections, just for seconds, enough to reset doors and confuse systems. Guards began walking in pairs, nervously checking corners and glancing behind their backs. Whispers of a human ghost spread between them, though they were ordered not to speak of it. Meanwhile, Eli began working on his next phase, using the Krull systems against them, hacking into security lines through forgotten consoles and rerouting surveillance to old backups. His voice never hurt his face. Never seen, and in those long hours between actions, he remembered his last mission years ago, a squad of 6 moving through enemy space, a failed extraction, ambushed, betrayed, 5 good soldiers lost, while he crawled back through a swamp of ash and blood. The guilt never left him, so he had disappeared, hoping to never see war again. But war had found him, and this time he would not run. As he sat in the dark, sharpening a makeshift blade from melted metal, he heard footsteps in the hallway above, and the faint sound of a Krell voice complaining about how this station was cursed and about how they should have blasted it from orbit instead of trying to take it. I whispered without emotion they should have, and with that he moved again, silent like the air, fast like memory, carrying with him the fire of someone who had lost too much and refused to lose again. Walls of the outpost had started to change their silence. Once peaceful, now held tension in every metal joint and panel. The air itself felt heavier, charged by something unseen, but always near, something watching and waiting. The Krell soldiers walked faster now, guns tighter in their grips, as if the walls might bite them back at any moment. Eli moved through the shadows with the quiet of someone who had lived 1,000 deaths in his memory, but still walked forward without pause. He was no longer just surviving, he was preparing, each move calculated, each breath measured, and every second used to shift control back into his hands. Piece by piece he was stealing this outpost back from the Warlord, who believed it already belonged to him. A panel deep in the storage wing, Eli found something he had once buried, his old bag, sealed in plastic and dust, and left behind when he had arrived here, hoping to leave that part of himself behind inside. It were small things, a patch with a symbol long forgotten, a thin blade with initials carved into its hilt, a data card marked only with numbers, and an old photograph burned at the edge but still showing the faces of 5 men and women in uniform. Standing tall beside him, all smiling, he sat in silence, holding the photo as the hum of distant patrols passed above his head. Their voices low, their movements sharp. His eyes remained on the photo, and memories crashed through him like a wave that could not be stopped. He saw again the jungle planet, the extraction point that never came, the fire falling from the sky, the screams of his team as they fought against a force they were never told about, the betrayal by command that came too late, the final order that told them to disappear and not look back, and the long walk through the mud where he carried 2 dog tags and a broken weapon. He had sworn he would never fight again, never wear a weapon in the name of someone else, never be a tool in a mission with no honor. He chose silence, chose machines and wires, and the soft hum of harmless work where no one died and no one lied. But now they had brought war to him and taken Mara, and that old promise meant nothing anymore. He returned to the ventilation shaft near the prison block, where Mara was still held alone, this time with her hands bound behind her back, her eyes focused on nothing but her breathing steady, strong. She had seen the mark he left. She knew someone was coming for her. She just didn't know how close he really was. Above her, Eli waited. He had set traps in 3 corridors, rerouted power to create blind zones in camera feeds, and stolen a passcode from a Krell officer who never knew he had been watched. He waited for the perfect second when patrols shifted and power flickered for only 5 seconds, and then he moved. The floor panel lifted, and before Mara could speak, Eli cut the field with a spark of the stolen control rod, grabbed her arm, and pulled her into the shaft. Without a word, she followed, crawling through tight steel passages lit only by dim emergency lights. They reached the safe room, hidden behind a forgotten maintenance chamber where he had set up tools, maps, and food. She looked at him, breathing hard, her eyes searching his face. "You're alive," she said, and he nodded, not yet speaking, still watching the door, still listening for any sign they had been followed. She asked how long he had been hiding, how much he had seen. He answered in short sentences, never saying too much, only that he had been waiting for the right moment, and that moment was coming soon. "You're not just a mechanic," she said softly. He looked at her, and then down at his hands stained with oil and ash and memories. "No," he said, "I'm not." She didn't ask more. She sat beside him and drank water from a cracked bottle while he returned to building the final pieces of his plan. But elsewhere in the command tower, Threx stood over a screen, replaying every strange event, every sabotage, every missing soldier, every system glitch, and he began to understand this was not random. This was precision. He stared at the screen and finally said, "This is not an accident. This is a trained mind, someone who knows war, someone who knows use." Ordered full scans of every human that had been listed in the outpost files. Someone had slipped through, someone had been forgotten, and now they were bleeding his forces from the inside. His second officer asked if they should retreat or call for backup. Threx snarled and struck the console. "Retreat from one human," he said. "Never. I will crush him with my own hands." The game was no longer quiet now. He sent out a message across the outpost, his voice booming through every corridor and hallway, even reaching the hidden chamber where Eli and Mara sat. To the one hiding in the shadows, he said, "I know you hear me. I know you think you are clever, but you are alone and weak. You cannot save her again, and you cannot stop what I will do next." Eli stood slowly, his eyes calm, his voice lower than the breath of wind. "He's wrong," he said. That night the sky above the outpost turned red as systems overloaded and emergency lights flickered. Guards ran through smoke and sparks while Eli moved through the chaos like a ghost that had waited too long to return. Mara stayed hidden as planned, trusting his map, his path, his timing. Eli reached the reactor core, planting the final sequence of charges, then moved to the hangar where Krell ships were refueling. He placed fuel lines open, set fire to the air, and disappeared into the service shaft before the heat reached the walls. Flames erupted behind him, but he never looked back. Threx, now furious, screamed into the dark, calling for the human, calling for a fight, and Eli whispered into the silent, "Comes, you want me here. I come." The night over the outpost was not silent anymore. It groaned with fire and shook under the weight of chaos. Alarms screamed across broken walls, lights blinked red like open wounds in metal corridors. Krell soldiers ran with weapons raised, but their orders clashed with fear and confusion as parts of the base crumbled and smoke filled the air. Eli moved through this storm with calm and focus, his steps careful, his grip steady, his eyes always ahead. He no longer needed to hide. Now the game had changed. Now it was time to end what had started. When Threx landed on Earth, thinking he had found an easy target, past a fallen Krell officer who lay unconscious after hitting one of Eli's traps. The hallway was dark, wires sparking from the ceiling, broken lights swinging like pendulum, shadows stretched and twisted, and Eli walked through them like they belonged to him. He reached the west junction where Mara waited, just as they planned. Her eyes wide when she saw the fires behind him, but she stood ready, no fear in her face anymore, only trust. They nodded to each other without a word and began moving toward the control tower. Through vents and lower maintenance paths they climbed, passing burned pipes and falling sparks from the damaged power grid. The outpost felt alive now, not with science or discovery, but with raw survival and revenge, and a fire that only a human could light. They reached the security floor where Eli plugged in the stolen access rod into the system and began unlocking the master codes. He had gathered everything over days, every password, every security blind spot. The Krell never fixed. Now it was all in his hands. He shut down their communications, blocked their signals, jammed their scanners, and turned off the lights. Section by section, the Krell were blind and panicked. Then he opened the hangar doors and watched as the wind from outside swept into the base, carrying sand and smoke through. The airships parked inside, several had already caught fire earlier, but now the flames spread fast fuel lines, leaking from broken pumps, fire climbing into the sky in columns. The Krell tried to escape, some ran for ships that would never fly again, others tried to regroup, but they no longer trusted each other. Fear broke their discipline, and fire broke their paths. And through it, all the legend of the ghost grew stronger. Soldiers shouted in their alien tongue that the base was cursed, that Earth was cursed, that the human was not normal, that he walked through fire like it did not touch him. Threx stood in the central tower watching his empire fall apart below. The outpost was supposed to be his victory, a message to the galaxy that the Krell ruled without challenge, and now it was being torn apart by one man, one human who refused to kneel. He turned from the window and shouted for his guards to prepare to find this human, to bring him in alive so he could break him with his own hands. But Eli was already coming. He had planned every path, every turn, every moment. This was not an accident. This was a storm he had crafted with patience and pain. He entered the central wing using the elevator shaft, not the doors, dropping 3 floors using nothing but rope and gloves. The landing was rough but clean and silent. Then he placed the last set of charges on the lower beams of the tower, not to destroy it completely, but to seal it so no escape would be possible. Once he faced Threx, climbed the final steps with the blade in one hand and a small EMP grenade in the other, he reached the door where 2 Krell guards waited. Both turned at the sound. But Eli was faster. The EMP burst knocked out their sensors, and his blade finished. The rest, it was fast, brutal, and finally he stepped into the command room where Threx stood in full armor, glowing red eyes locked on Eli. "So you finally came, the Warlord," said his voice low and filled with pride. "You burned my ships, you killed my men, and you think that makes you powerful." Eli walked closer, his steps slow and steady, his eyes not blinking, his voice calm. "I didn't come to fight a war, I came to remind you what it feels like to bleed." Threx roared and charged, his steps heavy, his fists like metal hammers swinging with full strength. Eli was smaller, faster, more precise. He dodged the first strike, rolled under the second, and drove his blade into the weak point near the Warlord's side. The armor cracked, sparks flew, but Threx grabbed him and slammed him against the wall, the air knocked from his lungs, the world spinning. Still Eli held on, striking again and again, small deep cuts aimed at joints, at nerves, at memory points. Threx screamed and threw him across the room, but Eli landed on his feet, bruised but standing. "You think I'm afraid of pain," he said. "Pain made me fight." Raged for minutes that felt like hours, metal against metal, fists against flesh, blood on the floor, smoke in the air, until both stood breathing hard, one limping, one bleeding, but neither falling. Then Threx charged again, and Eli stepped aside, letting him crash into the exposed power conduit behind him. The shock ran through the armor, through flesh, through pride, and Threx screamed as fire caught his chest plate and circuits failed. Eli took one final step forward and looked into the Warlord's eyes. "You chose the wrong human." Then he struck, and Threx fell. The tower shook from the charges below, not enough to destroy it, but enough to trap it. No ships, no calls, no escape. Mara reached the top moments later, seeing Eli standing alone above the body of the most feared warlord in the sector. She asked, "Are we safe now?" And Eli looked out at the fires across the base, at the humans rescued from cells, the Krell ships burning, and the sky opening above. "For now," he said. Then they walked together toward the exit, toward the light, toward the next dawn that belonged not to invaders, but to those who never gave up. The fire slowly began to die across the skies above the outpost, while smoke rolled over the sand like a second skin, hiding the scars of battle under its gray breath. The towers, once filled with control and pride, now stood silent, and broken cables hanging like torn veins, lights flickering dim in surrender machines, whispering their final hums before silence returned once more, the kind of silence that came not from peace, but from aftermath. Eli stood near the edge of the command tower, looking out across the wreckage. his body still bleeding from deep cuts, his muscles tight with exhaustion, his face calm but unreadable. The body of Threx lay behind him, cold and lifeless, with the armor cracked open across the chest, the warlord's face frozen in shock. Disbelief stamped into every line, like he could not understand how one human had ended him, without an army, without backup, without mercy. Below the tower, humans slowly stepped out from their hiding places, the ones who had survived the invasion, the ones who had feared they would never see the stars again. They stared up at the tower where the battle had ended, and though they could not see Eli, clearly they knew. The ghost, the one who had moved through fire and steel and turned death into resistance, Mara, stood at the base, watching as the wind blew through her hair, carrying the heat of the last explosion away into the open sky. She looked up, waiting for the moment he would appear, and when he did, limping through the doorway, his steps slow but firm, her chest lifted with relief. He had done what no one believed possible, and now he was coming home. Eli made his way down the stairwell, not rushing, not running, every step deliberate, every breath heavy but steady. When he reached the ground, she came forward and wrapped her arms around him. Without a word, his arms returned the embrace, though they trembled with exhaustion in that moment. No words were needed. They had both survived, and that was enough. The humans who had gathered looked at him with wide eyes, whispering among themselves, wondering who he really was, how he had done it, where he had come from, and what he had given up to fight like that. But Eli said nothing. He only walked past them toward the landing zone, where the Krull ships lay in ruin, their metal husks still warm from the fire. His mind focused on finishing what he started. He moved to the control console and began uploading a signal to Earthfleet Command using the encrypted codes he had hidden for years, codes he never thought he would use again. But now they were the only way to bring help, the real kind, the kind that would protect what was left. As he worked, Mara stood beside him, quiet and alert, watching as the transmission went out through the damaged comms. A long pulse of light reaching across the stars, a call for aid, not for battle, but for recovery. Within hours the signal was received, and within another cycle Earth's military response arrived, not with guns drawn but with care, transports and medics and engineers landing like rain after drought, moving quickly to secure the site and help the wounded. They came with questions but found no answers, only a man sitting near the broken tower, sharpening a piece of metal, like he had nothing else left to do. A captain stepped forward, her uniform crisp, her voice formal, asking who had sent the signal, asking who had fought off the Krell, who had held the outpost alone when the record showed no tactical unit assigned to the site. Eli looked up, his face unreadable, and said, "I was just a worker who stayed behind." The captain did not believe it, not really, but she saw the way the others looked at him and decided not to press further. Instead, she asked if he had a name to log for the report. He shook his head and replied, "Names are for heroes. I was just the wrong human to mess with." And with that he stood and walked away. The repairs began over the next few days. Walls patched, wounds treated, systems restored, the outpost slowly breathing again under new lights and new guards, this time stronger, this time prepared. But no one forgot what had happened, what one man had done alone, what one human had made the galaxy remember. Stories spread faster than orders. They reached other outposts, they reached Earth, they reached colonies and stations where fear had grown over time and now found new roots and hope. The story was told in different ways. Some said he was ex-military, others said he was enhanced, some believed he was a ghost of an old war walking again. But all stories agree on one thing: he was human, and he was enough. Mara stayed at the outpost for a while, helping with reconstruction, guiding the new team, and making sure the systems ran smoothly. But every time she passed the control room or the shaft, where she first saw the scratched mark on the wall, she paused for a moment, remembering the silence, remembering the man who had never bragged, never complained, and never failed. One evening she stood on the roof of the rebuilt tower, the wind cooler, now the stars brighter, without the smoke. She looked up at the sky and smiled. Somewhere out there Eli walked again. Maybe on another planet, maybe in another outpost, maybe far away from humans and aliens alike. Just a shadow moving from one place to another, fixing what others could not, fighting only when the fire returned to his blood, and fading again into silence. She never heard from him again. No messages, no calls, no names. Just the story passed on from one voice to another, told in quiet corners and loud bars across the stars. One about the alien warlord who chose the wrong human and learned too late that Earth may be small, but humans never are. And so the story ended not with a parade, not with medals, not with songs, but with a name that was never spoken, a legend born from fire and steel, and the kind of silence that only belongs to those who never needed to be seen to be remembered. The end.